Thank you for tuning into the Devy Devotional Podcast, a monthly show focusing on Devy prospects, strategies, and incoming rookies. Now here's your host.
Welcome into the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter. But tonight we have a very special guest. It's my other co-host from my other podcast, Andy at A*FF on Twitter, and he's coming over from the Full Tilt Devy podcast. If you guys haven't followed me over there, sometimes we end up doing two pods on the same night, and I will go from DD to FT. And Andy joins me over there. How are you doing tonight, buddy?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here. It's, I haven't been on any other shows actually besides Full Tilt Devy. So I'm breaking my guest podcasting bubble here. So big fan of the show, you guys. So it's fun to be here, and I can't wait to talk some rookies because I do have some fiery opinions. I think that might differ from some of the consensus that we've been getting so far. It's still early in the process, though, obviously.
TD is hyped. Let's go. But yeah, that's awesome. I didn't realize that you hadn't guested on another pod, but here you are. We're happy to have you. And the reason why we brought him on is we just wanted another opinion on what the hell happened this weekend and, and how everyone feels about it. Because obviously, if you're on Twitter, then you probably know that the sky is falling. Everything is on fire. The ship is sinking, and whatever else you can come up with. And I guess, maybe we always try to be a voice of reason in the streets. And so, maybe that's what we're going to try and be tonight. We wanted to bring Andy on and everything. But Aaron, I didn't really talk to you yet. So how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. And we just jumped into a rookie draft in a league that that you commish that I'm in. So, we're already getting into it. We're having to actually get our rankings together immediately. So this will be really fun to talk through that today.
Yeah, everyone paid up and everyone was like, hey, why are we waiting? Like, you want to just start the league? And I was like, or start the draft. I'm like, we can. I don't really care as long as everyone agrees to it. And so we got 12 votes and we got started. And we're already through pick 105. So, it's moving pretty quick. We only just started a couple hours ago. But like I said, we're going to be talking tonight about everything that went down. Obviously, I don't think that anyone expected exactly what happened this weekend with the draft. And so, if you did, then you should probably be betting a lot in future drafts because you're clearly pretty good at this. But there was a lot of surprises, a lot of things that, didn't surprise us. We expected certain things to happen and they did, but I guess just to start it out, like, what was your biggest surprise of the draft, Andy? What kind of blew your mind?
I wasn't expecting Sean Tucker to go completely undrafted. I figured a team was going to take at least a shot on him with like a 6th or 7th. Now we are finding out that he's getting like guaranteed money at the equivalent of like a 6th or 7th round draft pick from Tampa Bay. So it's kind of hard to really follow what their line of thinking was there. But, I thought somebody was going to take a shot on him. And then also Zach Evans. I knew that, he was going to probably fall a little bit, maybe out of day 2. Obviously, he did fall out of day 2, but I thought he'd be early on day 3 at the absolute worst. And he fell all the way to the 6th round, I believe. So couple shocks there with the running backs. And then, there's always guys that get picked earlier than what you expect. I don't really want to go through all of them. But from the wide receivers, I would say Josh Downs was a guy that I thought was going to go higher than he did. He still got day 2 capital, but, later in the 3rd. So not the best for Downs. And, I won't talk much about the situation there at this point. But, we would have liked to see him go a little bit earlier, being as dynamic as he was in college.
Yeah, definitely. Toronto Dave is a big Downs fan. He's not been a happy camper so far this weekend. Aaron, what was your biggest surprise?
For me, it had to be that Jahmyr Gibbs trade, subsequent trade of DeAndre Swift after the Gibbs pick in the 1st. I'm like, wow, that is early for running back. A, what are you doing, Lions? B, that's already position of strength for them. But I mean, I get it if they're like, we really don't trust Swift anymore to stay healthy. And if they really saw Jahmyr Gibbs as a guy they can keep um, under that rookie contract and build around, I don't know. I was very surprised to see that, especially that landing spot, because I did recognize the possibility of him going in the first. So very interesting. I would say that was kind of the big one that stuck out for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gibbs has to be it because I mean, no one, you heard a lot of like late first possibly to get the 5th-year option and that kind of thing, but you didn't hear too much of even like top 20, much less 12. And it's that definitely blew my mind. I was not expecting that. And Tommy T's already in the chat talking about Zay Flowers. Oh, man, we'll get into that here in a little bit, but yeah, he's got it right though. But I think that I think, well, I guess I should ask, what do you think it ended up being good for both players with Gibbs and with Swift? Because obviously, it could have been much worse if they had kept all 3 players and like that kind of thing. But obviously now we know that that Swift is on the Eagles, and so that we can say, was this like the best of both worlds for both of these players?
I mean, I'll jump in. I will say that it was surprising to see the Lions like upper management react to that pick. Like seemed like they just won the lottery, which I guess you got to feel good about it there. And then, like you said, he's getting that upper draft capital. Like we need to react appropriately. As far as Swift, I feel like for us dynasty players, like him getting traded was obviously very good. But I'm not sure it really improves his situation that much. Like at the end of the day, he's still in a running back room that has at least 2 or 3 guys that have had fantasy relevant games. We liked Kenny Gainwell, Rashad Penny, who's also had his injury issues. He could still very well be an RB1. So I'm not sure it's like an upgrade for Swift. So I think it was kind of like this a blessing, another sell window. Honestly, if you have Swift, like I would be unloading him right now because I think you could probably get that a lower end first, maybe a second for him. And at that price, I think I'm ready to just call it quits. It's also worth it to gamble, but at the end of the day, I think this is probably going to be his last year on his contract. He might have another year. I think I'll have to look that up. But to me, it just feels like, Tommy T's already talking. He says he sold him for a first yesterday. And I think that's the move. Like if you can get a first for Swift, like you got to do it right now because it's not gonna last long. Or, we're not psychics here. It could certainly end up well for him as well. But I just feel like there's enough there now where like, his value already tanked once. Like do you want to hold on to it and see it happen again? I certainly don't.
And I can see both sides of that argument, right? The kind of risk of, well, not even risk, but just the uncertainty, I guess, of a new spot. But I did like the landing spot. It was almost near perfect situation where there wasn't already a back that he had to share with necessarily when he heads in there. Again, we don't expect Swift to be like a 90+% of the touches type of back, but as long as he's getting the majority share, that's kind of intriguing. And I do think that the Lions limited him for a number of reasons. Majority of that being his health, yes. So he needs to get that steady if he's going to be, a really productive guy for us. But I think if you've been holding on to him and he finally gets into this better situation where he can become potentially more unleashed, I can see wanting to capitalize on him if you can really get a nice upgrade somewhere. Or like you said, if you can get premium capital, I don't know if I'm selling him for future first. If there's a little bit more involved, I think I'm all for it. But honestly, it was just funny to see. I was updating my dynasty rankings during day 1 and day 2 of the draft and even into day 3. And first I bumped Swift down a decent amount when the Gibbs trade happened. I'm like, well, I know he'll be traded eventually, right? But then when I saw the Eagles landing spot, I almost brought him back all the way up to where he was before. He might even go higher just because I don't mind the landing spot. Hopefully they'll hold him back less than the Lions did.
Yeah, I don't know if I can get on board with selling them for 24 first unless you're in like a full rebuild because assuming that you need fantasy points, then 24 first isn't cutting it for you. And I get that the concerns with Swift, but I mean when he has been healthy, the dude's a stud. And now, I mean, obviously the Lions had a very good offensive line as well. They just weren't using him properly. We have no idea how the Eagles are going to use him, but they did just trade for him. So, you hope when a team trades for a player that they're, planning on using him. So I would need a little bit more than I would need more than a 24 first. I would at least want a 23 first to where I can go get a player that can score me points now, like that kind of thing. I'm fine like pivoting off of Swift. And obviously it doesn't always have to be a first. You can go get a different player or whatever. I'm fine selling Swift. I have no issues with that. I just don't really love the idea of, oh, I'm selling it for 24 first. And then, like, what am I going to do? I'm wait until somebody decides they're rebuilding and now I'm going to go get points. No, I want points, as soon as possible.
The other aspect of all this is Jalen Hurts. Like, that he's going to account for maybe 40% of that team's rushing touchdowns. So again, the situation I think probably is obviously better than Detroit because.
Do you think that's going to go down now that they just paid him $250 million though? Like we've already seen Patrick Mahomes dislocate a knee trying to get through those piles and everything. I'm not saying it's some common occurrence, but no one really rushes the way that Jalen Hurts is rushing.
I will say I think that's something that's hard to coach out of somebody. Like if you're on the field and you're in the play and you see a lane to score a touchdown, you're probably going to take it. Maybe there will be less designed runs, like less of those. Like RPOs or not RPOs, but like those option runs with the quarterback where he just keeps it.
I'm talking about more of the 1 yard push play, where
no, I don't think those will go down.
Yeah, I honestly think that, I mean, there might be a slight dip, right? That makes sense. You get even a better back than what they had before. Not that Miles Sanders was absolutely terrible, but you'd say that Swift is probably an upgrade, debatably around the goal line. But ultimately, yeah, that's one of Jalen Hurts' biggest edges that he can give a team is that he can certainly give them high-end success around the goal line and in those red zone situations with his legs. So you take that away, and it's like you're going to hamstring your offense a little bit, kind of some of the things that they're building and what made them so lethal last year. So I think to a degree, the rushing touchdowns, I mean, he's still going to have quite a few of them unless he gets injured. Like you mentioned, John, it's possible, right? That can happen, but I don't think that they're also like the highest risk when he's just following those big offensive linemen and falling into the end zone. But we'll see.
I was more just bringing it up. I think teams always get a little more concerned when you have those millions and millions of dollars on the line. And Tommy T just hates Swift, obviously, because he's comparing him to Miles Sanders. I'm sorry, but DeAndre Swift is a much better running back than Miles Sanders. You can make the argument that he can't stay healthy, and that's perfectly fine. But you cannot make the argument that he's not a better talent than Miles Sanders. But we've seen what DeAndre Swift can be when he actually is healthy. But enough about Swift. That was just one of the trades. That was the big surprise of the draft. Obviously, there was a lot more that happened. Obviously, we know TD is a big Slime Sanders fan, so I'm not trying to besmirch, but if you know, you know. All right, so Aaron, I'm gonna ask you, what was your favorite pick of the first round? Obviously, there weren't too many like fantasy viable players that went in the first, but what was your favorite pick? Maybe it was the landing spot, maybe it was the actual pick itself. They went a little later or whatever. But what'd you like?
I really liked Jordan Addison, wide receiver from USC, going to the Minnesota Vikings at pick 23. And I know that might sound like a homer deal, but for people who listen to the show, it's not like I'm always just touting all Vikings and all Gophers players. Like I legitimately like the pick for what it is. It gives another weapon outside of Jefferson, which is awesome for Jefferson, but there's also going to be room for another fantasy viable wide receiver. They obviously lose Thielen. I think it's just a great spot, and he's a great talent. So if you want to go back to listen to a little bit more of our specific player analysis, we just did a mock draft just last week, and we went in depth all the great things about Jordan Addison as a player. But yeah, ultimately, I think that was great because they got him on the end of a run. There was JSN, there was Quentin Johnson, there was Zay Flowers. They all went directly before Jordan Addison. So being able to scoop still a tier 1 wide receiver up in this class, and a guy who I potentially like more than Zay Flowers or Quentin Johnston. Yeah, I like that pick.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't found too many people that hate the the pick there. In fact, I'd say most people really do like it. I guess I've heard a couple people that are concerned about J Jeff just being too good, but I think we've kind of disproven that at this point. That like two stud wide receivers can be two stud wide receivers in a good offense, even without the best QBs. It can still happen as long as you have a decent QB, which Kirk Cousins is decent. I know Aaron might have his own opinions on the matter because he's not the biggest Kirk Cousins fan, but I think you know that Cousins can do enough to get the ball to these guys.
Absolutely. And if you think about like from an analytical standpoint, if Justin Jefferson's getting maybe 35% of the receptions there, yards there, it's like there's still a lot of other available targets and receptions, yards, all those things in that offense. So that's intriguing. But how about you, Andy? Any favorite picks from either the first or maybe later on?
Well, I would have taken Jordan Addison as my favorite pick in the first. So I'm going to take my favorite not pick in the first, and that is the fall of one Will Levis. It was my favorite thing about day one of the draft night. Every time they showed his stupid face, I got a good laugh, and I don't want to talk trash about the guy's family, but for whatever reason, I didn't like them either. But I just felt it's unhealthy. I realize that, but I got joy from watching Will Levis continue to fall, and every time ESPN would say like, "There's only a 2% chance that Will Levis would still be available here," and that number just kept going down to like 0.1%. And I was in the Full Tilt Discord just saying like, oh, I hope he brought another suit for day 2. He's gonna have to hit Men's Warehouse tonight, but that was beautiful. Like it felt like vindication for everything that I've just been thinking. And the best part about all of it is like he still went early on day 2, so there's still people that are taking him in the first round of rookie drafts. Don't do that. But thank you to the people that are still doing that because you are leaving better players for the rest of us to draft.
I've heard of at least 3 occasions from just like personal, friends of mine that, like in their draft or them personally took Will Levis in the first round. So I know that for a fact that it is happening still, which is amazing. And we really do appreciate you all. Thank you so very much. No, that was great. I, I don't feel like I have the like actual hatred in my heart for the person like you do, but it was pretty hilarious. It's just like these players that shouldn't be going that early shouldn't go that early. Unfortunately, one of the players that shouldn't go that early did go that early, and Tommy T wants to talk about him. AR-15 number 4. Man, it's it blows my mind. I get it. Like people always fall in love with the athleticism, Henry Ruggs and Kevin White and and now Anthony Richardson. They're all the same player. He'll probably make that transition to tight end. I think I heard Tommy T comping him to Vernon Davis earlier today, and I honestly love the comp. Like I really do. He could actually be a stud tight end in the league for years to come. So I appreciate you saying that on the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast earlier, Tommy T. And I really do love the comp there, buddy. But what do you guys think of the Anthony Richardson landing spot, him going at 4 overall, all that kind of stuff?
I mean, I personally think it is a good landing spot if we're going to be objective about it, right? They have some weapons. They took Josh Downs as much as that was mentioned earlier. Sorry, Dave. That, he did fall a bit. It's not like he fell out of day 2. And also we spent a lot of time on our previous podcast, not relying solely on draft capital, right? Everybody who's going to fade Josh Downs because he lasted till the 3rd round. It's like, if you're just going to ignore everything that he did in college, including some of the most impressive production in the whole entire wide receiver class, then I guess that's on you. But ultimately, some good weapons there for Anthony Richardson. I don't really know how they're going to develop Richardson there. I think they're going to want him to play early and just see what he can pick up on, as he has very limited experience as a starter. I think he has the least experience ever out of a first round quarterback or something like that. I thought I saw some stat like that. So the least amount of games started at least. And I I think it shows, right, on his production, on his film, that he still has a lot of learning to do. But I think that's the allure of a guy like that. It's not like he's had like 5 years of college production to show us he's bad. It's like, yeah, we have a really small sample size, and the athleticism is obviously evident. So I get the people who are really excited about it. I'm kind of lukewarm. I do like it to a degree because they'll have a strong running game. They should have a decent enough offensive line. I don't know. There's reasons for optimism. But yeah, any other opinions on Richardson?
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way you do. Like, it's a good landing spot. I mean, people are going to be drafting him at 102 or 101, and that's fine. I guess he's super athletic. I would never draft him there. I think there's a chance that Gardner Minshew starts the season for at least a few games, because this guy, he's raw. He had less than right around 50% completion percentage in college. He's got the cannon for an arm, but his accuracy in the shorter intermediate throws is really below average. So that's stuff that he'll need to obviously work on. So I don't think you'll see this elite production in year one. But who am I to say that it's not going to happen down the road? I'm not going to make any bets on it personally, but it's certainly possible. Like, he definitely has the highest fantasy upside out of all these quarterbacks, but the chance that he hits that ceiling is a lot slimmer than CJ Stroud hitting his ceiling, which is still going to be a QB1, or Bryce Young hitting his ceiling, which is still going to be a QB1. So I get it. Like, if you're going for swinging for the fences, then yeah, Anthony Richardson's probably the pick. But you're betting on a guy figuring out a lot in the next few months, and I don't see it happening in the next few months. Like I said, it could be a year or two down the road where he's actually hits that Josh Allen level of elite production. But again, it's not something that I would recommend betting on when you're sitting at the top of the draft. There, you've got Bijan Robinson for one. I would never pass on him at 101. And then after that, I'd feel much more comfortable taking Bryce Young or even CJ Stroud before Anthony Richardson. But people are going to take Anthony Richardson. I'm not going to say that they're wrong for doing it. I just don't think that it's something that I would do.
Yeah, I think that there's a time and a place to pick every player, and there's a time when you should start going for upside and that kind of thing. 102 is not that time. 102 is when you get the safe stud players that you can actually score points and are proven in college and will still be QB1s, like you said, Andy. It's not like we're not saying safe, like, oh, they're going to be QB 22. Like, no, there's still going to be a top 8, top 10 QB at worst. And that's when you take those players. And then 107, 108, 109, 110 is probably where I would start feeling comfortable. And then you go take a player like that. But I do really think, I was going to ask you guys, do you think you should go try to get Gardner Minshew from people? Because there's a very good chance that he starts the entire season. At the very least, there's a good chance that he starts half the season. Obviously, we don't know schedules. We don't know when their bye week is. And that's generally when rookie QBs come in. So, at that point, you could have gotten a half a season or more. I mean, sometimes these bye weeks are like week 14, who knows? So I guess it would obviously depend on your league mate and do they think that Anthony Richardson's coming in week 1 and going to start, like that kind of thing. But would you be trying to send out some offers? Should you have been trying to send out some offers like all weekend? Or how do you feel about that?
And I'm kind of mad on that. I mean, I think it's fine, but ultimately they're going to want to see what their investment can offer there at some point, right? So he'll probably just give you that short term, maybe startable, flexible type of QB2 production, but I'm not super excited for Minshew's production either. I've always kind of liked him, but unfortunately, this probably isn't that opportunity that I'm looking forward to. But again, he might be really cheap. Like I just traded for Andy Dalton, who's going to be Bryce Young's backup, and it's like, I mean, I'm not even anticipating getting a lot of starts out of Dalton this year, if any. There might not be any, to be honest, because we like Bryce Young, right? We think that he's pretty pro ready, but at the end of the day, if it's super cheap, like I basically paid nothing for it, so it made sense for me to lock up that guy. I already had Bryce Young, so it's like it makes sense why sometimes you want to secure your handcuff too. So yeah, not a bad option if you already have or are planning to draft Richardson, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, we saw so many QBs start last year. 68, I think it was. It was a lot of QBs, whatever it was. And so yeah, having those backups, a lot of times. I mean, obviously, no one expected Brock Purdy to be starting at any point, and then there he was starting like what 6-7 games. So I'm not saying go out of your way to get these backups, but at the very least, you have the backup to a guy. But I know, and Tommy T, Steichen said that he said the most important thing for a player is to get early reps, and I heard that as well. Yeah, I'm not taking late April, early May coach speak as the gospel. So you can say that until you get the guy on the field, and then you're like, yeah, he's not seeing the field just yet. He can get some late reps.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's coach speak. And I kind of feel the same way about Minshew. Like, if you can get him for like a third, I guess go for it. But I'm not spending anything more than that. Even a third feels like a little expensive if it's like a third from this draft. But as far as like early reps and just the landing spot in general, I think for most of the rookie QBs, those early reps can sometimes be harmful because they're in a bad situation. But I do think Anthony Richardson is in a good situation with like that offensive line. He's got that run game to support him. A good wide receiver one at least. Now he's got Downs there as well, so there's some safety blankets there as well. I don't think you're going to hurt him by starting him early. So I do agree with Steichen in that aspect. Whether or not they do it though is anyone's guess at this point, because it is still very early. And again, like I said, he's got a lot to learn in the next few months if he's going to be an NFL starting quarterback.
Well, like you said, I mean, he has a great supporting cast. So, that's probably the best thing that you can say. A better supporting cast than a lot of these other guys out there. It's just that he has so far to reach just to get to starter level. But enough about Anthony Richardson. Let's see. We talked about that. I guess you mentioned third round picks, and I all I've heard is how nothing after 107 even matters. Trade everything, trade every pick. So what's the most egregious narrative that you've heard, or thing that you've heard since the draft about this draft class, Aaron?
I mean, I just heard similar sentiments to that, and I will say that I am somewhat more disappointed with how the depth going into that, second round range has played out. I will be honest. I'll say that I am more disappointed. I think that there was opportunity for more specifically of the running backs to land in great spots. I'm not actually disappointed about the wide receivers at all. And I didn't have to adjust my rankings much there. But running backs, unfortunately, a lot of them moved down, or just, are more murky than they were before. So I will say, that's probably a narrative that I've heard as well. And I don't actually think that third's that bad of a place. Like, I think the second kind of, the values decreased, maybe even the very end of the first round, I guess. But, and at least when one QB leagues, maybe not as much as Superflex. But once you get into that second round, yeah, it does fall off. But the second and third round still has a lot of guys where I'm interested. I still want to make some selections there. It's maybe not as comparable to some other years where the depth has been really, really solid into the second, but hey, we don't get that every year. And we should, I guess, keep that in mind. But yeah, that's a narrative I've been hearing as well.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on it haven't really changed too much. I kept hearing that the running backs, were getting bombed in this draft. I actually kind of liked a lot of the landing spots. especially the day 3 running backs, which are those are the guys that you're going to be getting in the second and third round. Like, you talk about Izzy Abanikanda. People are saying that's a bad spot. I know they're saying Breece Hall is going to be ready for training camp, but he had an ACL injury in November. I still think that there's a chance that, he doesn't see much time in the summer, and he maybe not fully ready week 1. And if that's the case, and, Izzy's going to get, maybe let's say a 2 or 3 week tryout, at least in a timeshare role, where, you can take him in the third and maybe flip him for a second if he has a couple big games. So that sort of thing, with the day 3 running backs, obviously also, I can't, I told you guys I did not prepare for this at all.
Well, you're
So
good. Like Zach Evans, right? That's kind of interesting if somehow Cam Akers is not really, fully back to health,
yeah,
or maybe, Sean McVay still doesn't trust him, or
I'm just looking at the whole list here. Like Evan Hull at Indianapolis. Like we know JT's had some issues. They got rid of Naheem Hines last year. Like he could immediately fill in that receiving role. Eric Gray's going to the Giants, where Saquon Barkley's obviously the guy, but he's had some issues. Are they going to?
He hasn't signed his contract either.
Right. So guys like that. I'm trying to remember who went to Cincinnati. It's escaping my mind. Chase Brown. That's a great spot too. So these day 3 running backs, and we've been seeing day 3 running backs, becoming more fantasy relevant. Roshan Johnson for Chicago. Like he's going to be more expensive probably now than I'm comfortable paying, but I think that's, one of the better day 3 landing spots in this whole draft. So there's value in these late second and third round picks, because these guys are in situations where they could see playing time very early, and it doesn't take much for that to happen. So, and again, and the quarterbacks too, like Hendon Hooker going to Detroit Lions in the third round. He's going to be like a later second pick. He's going to get a chance there at some point. It might be 2 years down the road when they decide not to re-sign Goff. Maybe it doesn't come at all, but he's going to be an injury away as well from just being a full-time starter on an NFL team. So I think there's value to be had. It's just you got to make sure you're picking the right players and avoiding the Tank Bigsby of the world. So. And then, guys like Josh Downs, who I thought was a slam dunk first round rookie pick, he's now getting pushed down into the middle of the second because of his, fall from into the late third round. I think, there's a great guy you could scoop up in the middle of the second now for, who I think at least is going to be, a pretty darn good receiver in the NFL for a lot of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so many of the best players went to not the greatest landing spots, and that's why the disdain for this draft has really come to fruition. It's like if Zach Charbonnet had gone to Cincinnati instead of Chase Brown, people would have moved him up to 103. He would have been 103. You wouldn't be hearing about any of this nonsense with QBs or whatever. It would just be that simple. And like you said, even if Izzy Abanikanda goes to Chicago instead of the Jets, you have so much more excitement for those players. So it's not that they didn't get drafted, it's not that they didn't get draft capital, it's just that they didn't go to the best landing spots. But then, like you said, you have players like Zach Evans, you have players like even late undrafted free agent and Sean Tucker going to the Bucks, where they basically have no one behind Rachaad White. I mean, there's so many more players. There's even more like undrafted free agents that I haven't even truly dug into yet, but they're starting to look pretty nice. Like at least, the guy behind the guy behind, that kind of thing. So you have a couple injuries and next thing you know, he's the next man up. And you love to get that on a taxi squad or something. So I agree with you. It took a hit because it wasn't exactly the landing spots that we wanted for the top end guys. But then we ended up maybe possibly getting a little more depth because of just good opportunity and everything later on. But even then, the top end guys still have great opportunity. I was talking about earlier with I think it was Aaron or no, it was somebody else. But I was saying how like if Zach Charbonnet gets or I'm sorry, if Kenneth Walker gets hurt, and Zach Charbonnet could easily be like a league winner, and next thing you know, you're feeling great about that pick, that you got in probably like the early second at that point because people just absolutely hate him now. And and people always are saying like, "Let draft the league winners," at the end of the first, that kind of thing. And now they hate him because Kenneth Walker is going to walk all over him. Well, it's like, well, no, he's still a good running back, and I mean, they drafted him early. They're probably still going to use him. I still think he's going to be a viable player. He's just obviously not going to have that week winning upside, most likely, unless something were to happen. But I mean, these are running backs. Stuff happens all the time. So, yeah, I wanted to kind of touch on that, like that it seems like people are just kind of like completely out on this draft class. And, I think it's absolutely hilarious that somebody I heard on a podcast yesterday after the draft and everything, of course, that somebody was like, well, this draft class, isn't nearly as good as 2022 was. It's just like, oh my God, like how before, obviously now we have hindsight and everything, but during that draft, during your rookie drafts, everyone hated every single pick. It's the same exact thing. We're doing the same exact thing, guys. Like it blows my mind. What are we doing here?
I mean, 2022 is better is asinine. Like that's crazy. Like there's not even a quarterback that I want in that draft anymore. Like you could say Kenny Pickett, but no thanks. I mean, I know Sam Howell and Desmond Ridder are going to get their chances here, but I don't want to spend too much time in 2022. But that's a bad take. And
well,
the
it's
running
also just using hindsight bias. Like that's all it is. It's like, well, Chris Olave hit, Garrett Wilson hit, like all these players that everyone hated hit. And then now, I mean, obviously people didn't hate Garrett Wilson, but I mean, they said, oh, the landing spot, Zach Wilson, whatever. Chris Olave was a senior. He couldn't possibly be good. And, now it's, oh, well, 2022 was an elite class. 2023 just absolutely sucks. It couldn't possibly be good, guys. What do you think, Aaron?
No, I mean it's funny how we do that, and we talked about that on our last pod even too. So it's always a crazy process, and everything's so fresh, right? I think we're all hurt a little bit, so let's just take a little self-care this weekend and going into this next week, right? Do something you like. I'm very sorry that Zach Charbonnet, went to a crowded situation there. That Kendre Miller is not getting the start day one necessarily. That Tank Bigsby's now probably the number 2, that, Zach Evans fell, right? You keep going down the list, but ultimately, let's not go overboard, right? Let's just say, take a deep breath, right? We calm down and we say, actually, there's some opportunity here. Might have to wait for it, or maybe it didn't come in the way that we expected. But let's not panic. And I agree. There's plenty of good quarterback talent in this class to be excited about. There's a lot of wide receiver. We haven't talked a lot about the wide receivers yet. A lot of them were drafted actually kind of earlier than some of us expected. So there's guys who are now moving up into the late second, into the third range that we could actually get excited about. So I don't know if that segues us into talking specifically about some of them, but I think that there's reason for optimism here. So yeah, that's a good thing.
I mean, I've mentioned on, I think, both of our pods before that, one of my favorite things about this draft class isn't necessarily how great the players are. It's the people falling in love with the shitty players that I love. And we're getting even more of it because Rashee Rice is a Chief. Jonathan Mingo got drafted in the second round. Like there's so many different there's so many different examples of what the hell's his name?
Cedric Tillman.
Schoonmaker is a thing all of a sudden. Cedric Tillman is getting pushed up boards because of everything, and that's just the wide receivers. I mean, that's not even getting into, or I mean, obviously Schoonmaker's a tight end, but we can get into the tight ends. There's tight ends that are getting pushed up because of their draft capital and everything, but a lot of these players are getting pushed up, and it's bringing down these quality players. Like I've seen multiple times Zach Charbonnet go at like 204. In rookie drafts, so like actual rookie drafts so far. Kendre Miller going late, and you were saying, Aaron, that you didn't think he was going to start day one. I mean, there's a decent shot that he's starting day one. I mean, I don't think it's that wild for him to be there. I mean, I guess maybe technically not starting, but to have like a quality role on day one. I should say.
Absolutely. And a lot depends on Kamara, but I just think that right now, we look at these situations and we say, "Oh, there's a guy there," right? And it just
Sure.
feels bad, right? It discourages us, but we actually shouldn't let that completely discourage us.
And there's
We should
always
try to
been a guy there with Kamara, though.
Yeah,
Ingram, like,
yeah, exactly.
Tony, whatever the hell his name was. I can't think of his last name right now, but there's always been a guy with Kamara. Like, he doesn't get 30 touches a game. It just doesn't happen. So I love the landing spot for Kendre. Obviously, if Kamara gets suspended, he's getting older, like things can happen, and Kendre could easily be once again another league winner. So I love that. But why don't we touch on a few more of the wide receivers, because I kind of went off on a tangent there, or a rant, and we started talking about the wide receivers. But Andy, I'm going to ask you about one of my favorite sleepers, like Devy sleepers, that I've been talking about for at least like a year now, if not longer. I moved him up way too high in my rankings, and maybe now it wasn't too high, because Jaden Reed went extremely early here. I even talked last week on Monday. We had a pod, and I drafted Jaden Reed in the second. What was it, like mid to late second? I think it was, Aaron. And I kind of got some grief about that pick, but hey, here we are. What do you think of Reed?
Well, first of all, he went to my Packers. My instant reaction was they just drafted like a smaller Christian Watson. And I feel like they don't really need the special teams aspect that he brings, because they've already got a Pro Bowl special teamer and their kick returner Mixon. So I didn't get the pick, but I'm happy for Reed that he got that early draft capital, because I do have some Reed shares from my C2C leagues. Additionally, he was a really early breakout. A lot of people might not know he started at Western Michigan before going to Michigan State, and he was behind guys like Dwayne Eskridge and Sky Moore when he was there, and he was still balling out. And those guys were obviously busts in the NFL, but they also got a high draft capital. So yeah, he's a good player. I'm not sure I like the pick for my Packers, because Josh Downs was still on the board, and I was really, really screaming at the TV for them to draft Josh Downs. But as far as it's concerned for Reed, yeah, I'm happy. He's another guy who's probably going to, just because he's on the Packers and there's just a legion of Packer fans in the world, he's probably going to see his ADP jump into the later to mid second round, I would think, maybe early third. But I think he's good, right? He's an athletic guy. He's going to make plays once the ball's in his hands. It's just going to be a question of whether or not the ball can get to his hands. If Jordan Love's, a reliable quarterback in this offense, and depending on, I'm trying to think, they've added those 2 tight ends as well. At least we think Musgrave, big athletic tight end like that, is going to command some of the passing volume. But it's still early for tight ends to do anything like that. So really the only other guy on offense there is Christian Watson catching passes, and obviously Aaron Jones and the running backs with AJ Dillon. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Packers do, because they focused a lot on offense in this draft. They drafted 3 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, a quarterback, and Lou Nichols, the running back, who at one point in time,
Aaron Rodgers his guys.
I know
he finally has that wide receiver core to throw to.
Well, that's the thing, is now that they don't have Aaron Rodgers to carry the entire offense, we got to actually draft an offense now.
Right.
So that's what they did. And
you want to talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place, though. Do you want Josh Downs to go to the Packers with Jordan Love, or do you want him to go to the Colts with Anthony Richardson?
Oh, Packers, please. I would have. Oh, the Packers would have been so much better, especially at that spot in the draft. But because I think Reed went in the second, right? Yeah, he did. So he was their second round pick. So, but I think eventually it's going to be 2021 all over again, when they drafted Amari Rodgers when Amon-Ra St. Brown was still on the board, and I was screaming at the TV then as well. So
Whoa.
I hope
Jaden Reed's actually
not.
talented, though.
Yes,
let's
I'm not.
let's not give that far.
Let me just clarify. I'm not comparing Amari Rogers to Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed's actually a good player. So that's why I'm not as angry as back then.
Yeah, and I also like the Jaden Reed. I don't really need to touch further on that. I mean, yes, maybe lackluster offense, but we know that can change if there is maybe an infusion in quarterback talent the following year, things like that. So certainly room for optimism. So he's a riser. So I have to commend John for, he's been on Reed for a long time. So that's really well done. And you'll notice even some of the guys here that we touched on in the mock, they ended up rising a decent amount because of the draft. Now, we need to separate, okay, they went early in the draft. Let's draft them in the early second. Like, we don't want to do that with Rashee Rice or Tank Dell or Jonathan Mingo. But, obviously that lends them a lot more opportunity. So now those third round selections, if you can get them in the third, let's say the league mates aren't falling for the draft capital thing, right? They actually become kind of intriguing third round bets. You just don't know sometimes about these kids' college paths. And if they find themselves in very favorable situations, one of them could develop and pop for sure. So very interesting. Some of the guys who are now getting more attention because they went on day 2. We talked about Cedric Tillman to the Browns earlier. And I mean, I'm still somewhat lukewarm on him. I don't think I have him in my top 10 wide receivers in the class, but still, he's a guy who now, if you can grab him in the third, you feel really good about it.
I think that's the most important thing you could probably take away from this entire podcast is just don't push up these players that just don't have any kind of production profile just because they got draft capital. And, that's obviously something that we've talked about plenty of times on the Devy Devotional and even on the Full Tilt Devy podcast as well. Like draft capital is great. And, you should move players within your tiers because of it. That's perfectly acceptable. Even landing spots or whatever you want to do, or just because you're a Packers fan, move that guy up to the top of the tier. Don't move him up to tier 1 when he's a tier 3 player. That's what you don't do. And that's what we're saying. And that's what Aaron was saying is, like, it's perfectly fine to take those players, your Rashee Rices, and like there is upside there. Kansas City is obviously the sexiest landing spot in the history of the world, but they've also proven to be really bad at drafting. Like, think about who they've drafted over the past 3 years, and then tell me that I'm so excited about Rashee Rice. Every year we do the same thing. We go, they're going to draft a stud. Josh Downs is going to the Chiefs. Rashee Rice, it's
it's
like
Miko
really
Hardman, Hardman, Sky Moore, then now Rashee. But you know what? I mean, who knows?
And then they
Rashee
traded for Kadarius Toney. Like, they're really bad at this, guys. The only thing they got right was Patrick Mahomes, and thank God they did because it's working out.
Yeah, but I guess somebody has to catch passes there other than Kelsey, and let's hope that Kelsey continues to stay healthy. Not a given at his age, and he's been playing at such a high level with such high usage still. But yeah, somebody has to break out. So there's a low probability chance that it is Rashee Rice. Again, I said low probability, right? It's not a certainty. That's why you don't draft him in the early second or pump him up even more. But
I have Rice as
fun.
my 301 right now in my rankings.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think, but I would say 99% of the time he's probably going to go ahead of that. And we're just saying probably don't do that. There's probably better players to take there. How do you feel about Rice, Andy?
I've always sort of been, middle of the pack on him. I know he was getting pumped up a lot by the Devy community earlier in the year when he was leading the entire country in receiving and for college football, which is obviously good, but historically it's not great for NFL, especially when these G5 guys who, he's a senior as well. So a late declare as well. He was, jockeying for targets with Danny Gray a season ago. So, not exactly, a star-studded cast over there at SMU. I'm glad he had a phenomenal season, but I'm not sold on it either. Especially, if you think about the other receivers that went on day 2, a guy that I don't see, his name is still not being mentioned that much, and that's Marvin Mims, who I think landed in a fantastic spot at Denver with his second round draft capital as well. Granted, it was the very last pick in the second round, but yeah, I mean, for Rashee Rice, yeah, I think fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, and it's my fault. So I'm not gonna be drafting the Chiefs wide receiver that they took in the draft way higher than he should be. I'm gonna stick to the process again, and like you said, Rashee Rice feels like an early third round pick, and he's probably not going to last that long just because he has that connection to Mahomes. Speaking of the Chiefs, they added Richie James, who played pretty darn well for the Giants last year. Had a great game when he was on the when he filled in for Deebo Samuel on the San Francisco 49ers a couple seasons ago. I think Richie James is actually a pretty reliable wide receiver, and I don't think that it's just a foregone conclusion that they're just going to draft the day 2 guy and he's just going to come in and start taking snaps from people. So that's kind of how I feel about it. Sky Moore is still on that roster, guys. Like, he's also a second round pick that they took just a season ago. So
Right.
It's possible that he starts seeing some snaps again. So that's kind of how I feel about it. I'm not pumping him up to like the high second, like I think might actually happen with Rashee Rice.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting, but I think he's going to get pushed up way too much. I love the Mims call out. I mean, the landing spot is good. Like, people always talk about, like, Cortland Sutton hasn't done a damn thing since his first like 4 games that he ever had, and then he can't do anything when Jerry Jeudy's on the field, and then Jeudy can't stay healthy. So why wouldn't you be extremely intrigued about Marvin Mims? Now, I like Jerry Jeudy. I want him to stay healthy, but I mean, even if he does, I don't think it's that crazy to think that Marvin Mims could overtake Cortland Sutton at some point. And honestly, I mean, they might even all 3 be able to flourish in that offense and everything. I'm not even saying he has to overtake him. Who knows? But he could easily be the third man up. Now, I will say, I know everyone and their mother seems to love Tim Patrick, so like I don't want to just act like Tim Patrick doesn't exist and that kind of thing. But I'm very excited about Marvin Mims. And when you're talking about those players, it's Marvin Mims by a mile over a Rashee Rice for me, at least.
Oh yeah, I really like the Mims landing spot too, and I'm moving him in my dynasty rankings ahead of guys like maybe Deontay Johnson, Christian Kirk, Mike Evans, Brandon Cooks,
Love
Tyler
to see it.
Lockett. I mean, he's definitely trickling up, and he was already rising, for many of us in the pre-draft process, and the draft only yielded a good spot and further confirmation that he is indeed a pretty good player and somebody who can hopefully replicate maybe some of the things that Russell Wilson worked with Tyler Lockett, for example. So definitely intriguing with Marvin Mims. I could see him being a great selection in the early second round in Superflex drafts, for example.
All right, now we haven't actually touched on too many of the tight ends besides Anthony Richardson yet, so I figured we should probably dive into that a little bit more. Obviously we had quite a run there of the tight ends in the first and second rounds. The early rounds, the important ones, and it's been considered an elite tight end class. So I mean, not only did we get the elite talk, we got the elite combines, we got the elite production, and then we got a pretty damn good draft capital at the very least. How are you feeling about this tight end class now that we actually have landing spots, draft capital, all that kind of stuff? Does anything stand out or anyone stand out?
For me, no. Michael Mayer fall was, I think, a little predictable. I think that he probably saved a lot of people from overdrafting him in rookie drafts by falling to what was he, the third tight end selected.
I've still seen him drafted at like 110 in quite a few, or I can't say quite a few because obviously there hasn't been that many drafts, but in a handful of drafts, I've seen him drafted around that like 110 to 112 range, at the very least, the early second. And I do agree that it's probably a little too early.
Yeah. I mean, so you're still seeing Dalton Kincaid go after him in pretty much or a lot of rookie drafts anyway. And I don't know if Dalton Kincaid was, the best landing spot either, because I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Dawson Knox just doesn't exist either, because he's had some solid seasons as well. Sam Laporta to the Lions, I think, is kind of intriguing. And then also, like I mentioned with the Packers, they get an athletic guy in Musgrave. Musgrave's not a guy that I really liked pre-draft, pre-combine or anything either. It's just sort of like a athleticism game with tight ends, generally speaking. So that's why I kind of think, okay, well, Musgrave's got the fourth best RAS score in the draft, so maybe that's something.
But I was going to ask you, as a Packers fan, the second one was what, Tucker Kraft?
Tucker Kraft, yeah.
Yeah, I've Kraft ranked ahead of Musgrave.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you feel about that. I mean, I know you already said you didn't really like him, but
yeah, I don't think I'm going to draft either of them ever. So, I'd much rather take shots on some of these later running backs or some of the wide receivers before I would, scoop up some of these tight ends. Because I think just, like I said, the Green Bay name just seems to carry a bump in everyone's rookie values. So I think a lot of these tight ends, I remember when like Josiah DeGuara was getting drafted in the third round of rookie drafts, just because people thought, oh, maybe he's going to be the next tight end for Aaron Rodgers. Now, obviously, Aaron Rodgers isn't going to be here anymore, but but some of the landing spots too, like Darnell Washington, a lot of people thought he was going to be this big steal of the draft, and now he's on Pittsburgh, and Freiermuth is obviously there. Cameron
Kenny Pickett's there too.
Yeah, right. So I'm not intrigued really by any of the tight ends. Zach Kuntz was a guy that I really wanted to get some draft capital just because he was like a freak of an athlete, but then he fell to like the 6th or 7th round. So, I'm just kind of out on the tight ends, really. I don't really have a preference for any of them.
Sure. And for me, I have a tier 1 and 2 that I'm interested in. And then after that, I think I'm with you. Like Andy said, they kind of drop off. But I do think that Michael Mayer and Dalton Kincaid are tier 1 tight ends in this class. And with Sam Laporta very shortly after them. I know I think John had he's continuously updating his model, but I know Laporta was right in the thick of things, right, with Mayer and Kincaid, and I honestly think that
I have
he might be
technically Beth has Laporta and Kincaid like almost tied. It's extremely close. Now I personally moved Kincaid ahead of him just because of the landing spot and stuff like that. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you can do that, guys. You can move within tiers and all that kind of stuff because they're basically tied. But it's when we go crazy with other things is when I have issues with it. But I'm sorry for cutting you off here.
No, you're good. And you know what? You're probably proving a good point that maybe they all belong in one tier, those top 3 guys, because they all landed with day 1 or day 2 draft capital. They all landed in situations where they can be heavily utilized. Like Andy said, I mean, Dawson Knox is there for the Bills, but there's a reason that they saw a need to get a better tight end in round 1. It's not because they wanted a backup, in my estimation. And I've always been a Kincaid guy, but Michael Mayer to the Raiders, I mean, they need a tight end desperately. Sam Laporta to the Lions, another desperate need for them. So, and then no Jameson Williams, right? It's like after Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta could honestly get a role right away. And we'd love to see that with tight ends because sometimes they are that slow burn that takes time. So some at least decent landing spots for those first 3, but after that, I'm really disinterested.
Yeah, I was trying to look at where my next tight end is.
I mean, I have Darnell Washington next, but I don't like that. Like Luke Musgrave probably belongs above because he went in round 2. He's similarly athletic, and I mean, he hasn't really proven it, but some of that is due to injury. So, I mean, what's Darnell Washington's excuse? I know he had a great tight end that he played with, but still, come on. There was enough passing volume at Georgia for him to do more than what he did.
I lied. I actually have Tucker Kraft as my next one.
Wow. But that shows how much drops off, at least in my estimation.
It does. It drops off quite a bit. I mean, it's a pretty big drop off from, those top 3 guys to the other ones. So yeah, I'm with you. I think honestly, even through the combine and everything, I was sitting there going like, I don't think this is nearly as elite of a tight end class as everyone's making it out to be. But that brings me back to my other point of I love this class because people are drafting the shitty players. And so people are going to take Luke Musgrave because he was the first tight end taken, for the Packers, and he was an athletic marvel. People are going to take Zach Kuntz. They don't care. He got 6th round draft capital. He's the 10 on Raz, which, if you just stopped ever looking at Raz, you'd probably be much better off. But that's neither here nor there.
I wish somebody would tell that to the Green Bay Packers, because it seems like that's the only thing that they look at.
Yeah. There's a time and a place for Raz, but it's not for drafting players early. I can promise you that. I think that's enough about the tight ends there. I guess we should probably get into, we've talked about some running backs. We talked about wide receivers, tight ends, obviously the quarterbacks. I guess, no, I will ask you, I feel like we got some interesting backup QB landing spots, either late in the draft or undrafted free agents. I think it was mostly late in the draft, but are there any like backup QBs that are kind of standing out to you now that we actually have landing spots, DC and all that kind of stuff?
I mean, I'm not terribly excited, no. So, I mean, there's CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, maybe a little drop off with Will Levis, and then Hendon Hooker, and then, gosh, there's a big drop off. It's kind of like the tight end position. There's kind of a big chasm between those top options. And then maybe Stetson Bennett. You like him going to the Rams and seeing what
I
Sean
love
McVay
that.
could
That's what I'm
do.
saying. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that he's the best quarterback to ever,
No, but like in the
play the
fourth
quarterback
round,
position, but but going to a place with the quarterback that has been extremely unhealthy, has considered retirement, and they don't have a lot of like draft capital money, all that kind of stuff. It's there could be much worse landing spots than that. So like, I'm not saying he's going to go out and win you a league, but once again, we talked about how there was 68 QBs that played last year. You could easily be playing Stetson Bennett at some point, because guess what? It was the backups to Matthew Stafford that were part of that 68 QBs.
and then like Jaron Hall from BYU going to the Vikings. I mean, you just don't know that the Vikings are actually going to keep Kirk Cousins. And you know what? We're probably not going to actively tank. So that means that we're not going to be in contention, most likely, for a Caleb Williams or a Drake May. That puts, maybe some interest. I don't really like Jaron Hall, to be honest. I don't love him, right? But if you're just saying from a landing spot standpoint, that's interesting. Jake Hayner going to the Saints. I guess some people might be interested in that. I could see it as well.
I mean, for me, it's just like the only one that I care about is Stetson Bennett. I think that with Matthew Stafford's health concerns, like, people were thinking maybe he would just straight up retire this year due to concussions and spinal injuries and everything else under the sun. I think that he's got the best chance. I was just looking at the draft here. Obviously, my Packers took Sean Clifford. If Jordan Love doesn't work out, which I think a lot of us feel like he's going to at least be serviceable, then, that's certainly something that could happen. He could certainly see some playing time. And then also Max Duggan, he's a Heisman finalist a year ago. He went in the 7th round. He's going to be behind Herbert. But you can't project injury, right? And the other thing, Herbert doesn't have anything that would sort of tell you that that's going to happen. But, Max Duggan, I think, is a guy that profiled pretty well. I mean, obviously, he's got some arm strength concerns and some size concerns, but, he's an accurate passer. We know he can win games. He's a gamer. So it's guys like that are never going to be like QB1s, obviously, but they're going to like show up and like get a spot start and, maybe score you 15 to 20 points when you need it. Because somebody else is hurt on your team or you're on a bye week or something. So there's value in those guys, but I'm not sure I'm using a rookie pick to grab them.
And some of our listeners also are in these insanely deep C2C leagues and things like that. So, I mean, it makes sense to go over some of the depth options, even if we don't have high-end expectations for them. But, a couple of the landing spots could lend themselves to some development and potential spot starts or rises. A couple of these guys, I suppose.
One that I'll be targeting probably in the 5th round at some point, or maybe even after drafts, like after you play around with your taxi and all that kind of stuff, is Aiden O'Connell going over to Las Vegas. And I mean, Jimmy G has never proven anything, first of all, but he's also never proven to be healthy. Has he ever played a full season? I don't think he has. And so, it's a pretty ripe landing spot for him to see playing time. And actually, I honestly don't hate the player. Now, once again, I'm not projecting him to be some stud or anything like that, but I think that I'm looking for, like, Andy was saying how you can't project injuries and stuff like that. But when you're looking at players that have been injured every year, you could kind of start projecting a little bit. Obviously it doesn't mean it's going to work out, but I'm looking for that kind of stuff. Brand new situation. We have no idea how Jimmy G is going to be outside of San Fran and that scheme and everything. He could just honestly be terrible. And if that's the case, even if he doesn't get hurt, we could still possibly see Aiden O'Connell at some point. But it'd probably be more likely if it was an injury or something. But I think that's about where I'm like done with the QBs at that point. I'm getting nods of approval there. So I guess we'll move on from that. I talked on Sean Tucker earlier. Obviously, we touched on him on Monday with the heart condition. I think you had drafted him in like the early third or something like that, Aaron?
I think it was so a couple of interesting players from that draft that did fall, because that draft is pretty evergreen, actually. Like, if you compare it, how
Really?
drafts are going to go now, like, yeah, who would have thought, right? Without draft capital, we could
So
actually be
weird.
somewhat accurate.
Yeah.
But Zach Evans at 201, I think that one definitely that's going to change, right? And then Sean Tucker at 212, I think it was. That's also going to change a little bit. But I mean, Buccaneers landing spot as an undrafted free agent, kind of interesting.
Yeah, like I said, there's not too much unless you think Keyshawn Vaughn. I mean, he literally hardly touched the field at this point. And when he has, he gets pulled pretty quickly. So I don't know that I'm overly concerned about Keyshawn Vaughn at this point. We like Tucker. I think the NFL likes Tucker. The question now is just the medicals. But it's so weird because I just don't understand. Like, if these players aren't healthy, like, why even give them $155,000 guaranteed? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe they just have so much money it doesn't matter, and they're like, well, we'll give you 150 grand, and maybe if you stay healthy, it'll work out, and if not, then oh well, we lost 150 grand, who cares? But I would probably be doing a little more research on that kind of stuff if it was me. Andy, do you have anyone else that is truly sticking out, or do you have more to add on Tucker there?
Not anything else to add on Tucker. I mean, I said earlier that I was surprised that he just went completely undrafted. I thought somebody was going to at least take a late pick on him just to, bring him in and try him out because he was such a dominant player in college. But what was the original question? What are we talking about here?
Just like later round, like finds, sleepers, whatever you want to call them. I was trying to pick up on guys that maybe fell. Like, obviously the Zach Evans we already touched on. Sean Tucker we touched on. There were some other players that maybe fell a little bit more than we expected. But I didn't know if there was anyone that, like, it doesn't have to be a faller per se, but like anyone in the later rounds that you'd be truly trying to target.
And there was also, sorry to interrupt, just while we're still talking about Sean Tucker, though, there was some speculation. Now, this is pure speculation. This is not necessarily widely reported, but Sean Tucker may have preferred to go undrafted, choose his landing spot, maybe get a higher signing bonus type of deal. Could that have been actually the reason? He's like, no, I don't want to get drafted. He's telling teams, no, this is my preference. So, could that be part of the reason, not just medicals? Yeah. So I guess that could be interesting as well. We don't know the full story, but
Right.
Go ahead, Andy. Tell us more about these running backs.
Well, I feel like I dove quite a bit. I mean, I didn't dive in, but I mean, the running backs, I mean, I've already mentioned Evan Hull. I feel like he's going to have a role as like a pass, kind of like what Nyheim Hines was doing at Indianapolis before he got traded to Buffalo. I mentioned, Eric Gray, who's obviously going to be behind. We think he's going to be behind Saquon. He seems like he's like, just one play away from having a pretty significant role. But I will touch on some of the wide receivers. Xavier Hutchinson is a guy that I've really liked for a long time. He ended up at Houston in the 6th round. I think there's at least a path for him to earn some playing time there. It's hard to, really say a 6th round pick is going to end up on the field immediately. But I think, he's a guy that had a good production profile in college. Could certainly, be something in the NFL. And then the other guy that no one's mentioned yet today is Kayshon Boutte, who went in the 6th round to New England. You know, we've got some kind of murkiness around Boutte, and what's going on? Why wasn't he as fast as he used to be? Especially in the combine. So is it still lingering issues? That's something that can be fixed. I don't know. The the Patriots landing spot is, I would say, pretty good. There's not like an elite receiver on that roster who's gonna, just command all the targets. So it's certainly some place that he could carve a role out. And a year ago, this is a guy that I think the majority of people would say is a tier 1 wide receiver. So in that aspect, I think that you got to think, okay, well, there's a guy that at least, I may be able to carve some value out.
Yeah,
I
like the
agree.
call.
Aaron was talking about him, last week, and how he kind of picked up on the Georgia game and stuff. And, it's so tough with a player like that, because on one hand, you wonder if like the athleticism is just completely sapped because of the injuries. But then on the other hand, you think like, how long can, something like that, truly take? It's so weird. It's such a weird thing. He was so good and then he was so bad, and it just doesn't really make any sense. But like you said, Andy, he went to a great landing spot. And I mean, by great, I mean like ambiguous or open landing spot. And, I think that he could definitely see playing time immediately, at the very least, at some point in the season. And so you can't even say that about a lot of your like 3rd round picks and everything that are like kind of guaranteed playing time. So I've been kind of all out on Boutte for the longest time, but to be fair, that was mostly because he was still being talked about in the 1st round of rookie drafts at the time. But you give me him in the 3rd round, I think I can get on board.
No, exactly. And I don't have too many more names to throw out there. I mean, I think Dwayne McBride really late in your drafts, Vikings, who knows, I guess, what's going to ultimately happen there with Dalvin Cook. I'm not insanely in love with Alexander Madison or Ty Chandler, for example. So Dwayne McBride, he is a good rusher, limited receiver, at least from our knowledge from his production, but that's of interest. And if you want to go a little bit deeper, Xavier Valade, running back. So Arizona State, I think he was at Wyoming before. And honestly, going to the Texans, Valade is an interesting option. You look at that depth chart there. And I mean, I'm not saying that he even has much of a shot to be a starter right off the bat, but after Dameon Pierce, after Devin Singletary, those two, then it really falls off, and you just don't know how much Valade could impress the coaching staff, as he's a capable rusher and receiver. So that's just a very deep running back shot that it's like, might as well. I mean, the team
Yeah.
doesn't have a lot of picks next year either. They gave up so much to just get their combination of Will Anderson and CJ Stroud. It's like, I mean, they're going to be strapped next year. They don't have a 1st round pick, and they're going to need to make their 2nd and 3rd round picks matter. Maybe it'll take wide receiver. I see that as much more of a pressing need than running back. So maybe it's another season that Dameon Pierce survives the draft next season, or maybe they'll bring in a free agent, right? They could bring in Leonard Fournette or Zeke or somebody, I guess. But ultimately, just a really low probability, but still a little upside.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I could actually find myself drafting Valade, but I could maybe see myself starring him on Sleeper and keeping track of what's going on, or just like making sure that like I don't forget about him,
Right,
because
like a
obviously if he
taxi
were to,
squad type deal too. Yep.
yeah, if you have a taxi squad, if you have a large taxi squad, or anything like that, then I could see putting him there. But yeah, I'd like I I haven't always taken advantage of like the star feature on Sleeper, and I probably should do it more often, just because somebody drops a certain player or whatever, and you can go grab them at that point. And I probably do need to be better about that, and maybe that should be a good transition into, we haven't truly talked about like strategy just yet, but I mentioned, at least in the show title, that we would talk a little bit of rookie draft strategy. So one of those things might be, if you can't draft another player, maybe just throw that star, that favorite, or whatever the hell it's called, on them, and just so you don't forget about them. You get notified if things change with their situation, that kind of thing. But Andy, do you have any words of wisdom as far as a rookie draft strategy? At least, like how are you going to go into this rookie draft now that things have kind of been, flipped upside down, or at least changed a little bit? Maybe not flipped upside down, but switched up a little bit. Are you going in with a certain mindset, or are you, just going to stay water, as they say?
I I feel like I do most drafts by like the same mindset, and it's just sort of like take value when it comes to you, because there's always like somebody that drops that shouldn't drop, and if he's there, you gotta take that value and stick to your process, because you don't want to be like caught up and say like, oh man, everyone said it, like we mentioned Anthony Richardson. Maybe you're in a league and all of a sudden you're at the 105 and Anthony Richardson's right there. And you're thinking, well, man, he's going 102 everywhere else. If you're like me and you don't believe that that's necessarily the best pick, then maybe you do stick in with taking Gibbs or Stroud or whoever else is there, and just let somebody else jump on that grenade, or find that treasure, however it ends up playing out. But in this particular draft, I think I've already mentioned that I think there's going to be a lot of value in the second and third round. So if you can like trade, I wouldn't even say trade back, but make trades where you can acquire some of those extra picks, and maybe move some of your 24 thirds and in up, and because people are saying, right, oh, I don't want any part of this draft, give me your 24 picks. So take advantage of guys that are doing that, because you might just be able to get 1-for-1s, which typically does not happen. You have to sort of pay a premium to move into this year's draft, which sounds like sometimes, that might not be the case, because everyone's saying 24 is going to be so much better than 2023. So, that's at the end of the day, you're going to try, you can't attack if you're in multiple leagues. I try to, be different, right? You want to at least, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So you got to have some variance. But at the end of the day, you want to kind of stick to the same roadmap. And for me, it's, really sticking to my own process, because I've been a victim of like taking Keyshawn Vaughn too early, just because everyone's saying, oh, what a great spot he's in. And then all of a sudden Leonard Fournette shows up and he's worthless. He's been worthless ever since. And people are spending, in some instances, first, early second round pick on guys like that. Sky Moore last year, just try to be true to yourself, I guess. And unless, at the end of the day, you're the one making the final decision. But, if you're not confident in it, then yeah, you should, maybe listen to smart guys like John here and Aaron. Definitely not me, but from at the end of the day, you just want to do what you think is the smartest decision. Don't let the ADP make the choice for you.
I like it. And I like some of the points you made too about if you can trade around in your draft. Now be strategic. If you have a tier of players that you like and you're like, well, I can afford to move back a few slots and then, take advantage elsewhere, maybe gain some extra future picks. Not a bad strategy, right? We know during the season, once you're trying to compete for a playoff spot or you're in the playoffs, but you need a Jerick McKinnon, something like that. What do you have to offer them? Did you trade away all of your late round picks? Do you have zero ammunition? Are you going to have to sacrifice something of actual significant value to get a win now piece? Maybe consider what you can do to load up now if you can move back within the draft. And sometimes that'll allow you to move back up if you see a guy falling in your draft. If you see a Zach Charbonnet fall into the very end of the second round, well, yeah, grab him, right? I mean, that's might seem obvious, but if you have that extra ammunition, that's key. And I think, yeah, you got to be sometimes flexible with your strategy, but as long as you know what your team needs, so your team analysis, that can allow you to maneuver the draft. So I'm not saying draft for need. No, still draft for value, right? Draft best player available in these rookie drafts as much as you can. But if you really are like, I need a quarterback, I really need it, don't reach on a Will Levis in the first, right? Just don't do it. A Hendon Hooker at the beginning of the second. Trade around, try to take advantage of values and still get the guys that you want or need.
Yeah, don't force picks, don't force positions. all that. I have an article coming out in 3 days, I think it is, and it's basically how to draft a rookie, and it's basically talent versus situation. The question that we've always had, is do you draft the talent or do you draft the landing spot or the situation? And I think that you don't even have to read the article anymore, which is not a good way of pumping it out or pimping it out. But what I'm going to tell you is, it's just don't move these guys too much. Tier-based drafting is the best way to do it. I've mentioned it a million times, and I'll mention it a million more. And you can move them within the tiers. Do your thing. I'm not going to argue with you if you move a guy that one guy above another guy, as long as they're in the same tier. You like that player for whatever reason, that's fine. It's just moving them, drastically, moving them substantially. That's when I start hating it. Like Aaron was saying, like taking Hendon Hooker at 202. Maybe there was a time and a place where that could have been a thing, but with how things went down, like you have to assume he's going to be a backup QB for a year, like that kind of thing. And even then, we're talking about a 25-year-old QB that was in a scheme that isn't fantastic. I like the player. I'm not trying to hate on him at all. I'm just saying like there's question marks, and you don't take those guys early. Will Levis, question marks, fell in the draft, second round draft capital, back to Ryan Tannehill. Maybe he'll see the field at some point. We don't think he's that good. Don't reach on those kind of players just because it's QB. Don't reach on a running back just because you don't feel like there's any running backs left. There's a lot of running backs in this class. We've touched or talked about a lot of them. So don't think that like you're out of running back somewhere in the second round. There's a lot more to come, and they're probably even easier to come by at that point. But go get the proven studs, get the players. And if you don't trust your process, I was there 4 years ago. I hated my process. I decided I couldn't do this anymore, and I completely changed my process, created Beth, did all that kind of stuff. Now you can either do that and spend months and months and months creating your own models and all that kind of stuff, or you can just go check out my rankings. Aaron, slide into the DMs, ask Aaron who you should be taking. Obviously Andy as well. I know he was trying to be modest there, but if you've ever listened to Full Tilt Devy Pod, that he knows what he's talking about as well. Find somebody. It doesn't have to be me. I'm not just trying to pimp my stuff out. Find somebody that you trust that has a proven process, not just has pretty rankings with colorful this or colorful that or whatever. Like say, hey, who'd you have last year? Who did you draft last year? Do you have your rankings from last year? Like that, do you have a tweet that you can prove a date, like that kind of thing? Ask for proof, when you're trusting someone's process. And, if they can't give it to you, then they're probably not worth the damn. But that would be my draft strategy is, I've said it a million times. I'll say it again. The best talent matters. The talented players matter. DC only matters so much. Draft the best players and you will win your fantasy leagues. Anything to add, boys?
Wow, Dynasties just got so simple.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm I'm Dynasty Coach A. I'm trying to make things simple for people, breaking it down, coaching everyone up. And that's what we do here, baby.
Hey, we appreciate you, Coach. And also, we didn't even get into, and we don't need to get into it. We've talked at length today, but we didn't even get into like Devin Achane, like his landing spot. And there's just, quite a bit of interesting things that happen with this draft. So we'll keep the dialogue going. Reach out to us if anybody has questions. Of course, we are happy to always take inquiries or just have a discussion back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, like Aaron said, I probably will go back and actually listen to the pod from Monday because I don't remember exactly every pick or anything like that. But I'd love to see how how it really works out. But we gave a lot. I mean, we talked for 2 hours on these players. So we talked about Devin Achane. We talked about all those kind of players. So tonight wasn't about like truly diving into the players. It was more just about what we felt and what we saw from the drafts and that kind of thing. So if you want to learn more about the players and make your own decisions, you can go back to that pod or a lot of the other pods that we've done because we've talked about these players for months and years and that kind of thing. But Andy, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I mean, we've been at it for almost an hour and a half here. And yeah, you mentioned Devin Achane we haven't talked about. Another guy that had a good landing spot, Jalen Hyatt, who I've liked. He's on the Giants, who they really don't have any pass catchers there that I think are worth much of anything. So he's immediately their wide receiver one as far as like dynasty value is concerned.
Whoa! Did Wandale die?
I think I would prefer Jalen Hyatt personally.
I like wide receivers
you're
that can
right.
run routes, but I mean that's just me.
You're right about Wandale. He is still something to me. But
I like Hyatt too, and it might actually be a good fit too, because I don't give Daniel Jones a lot of credit, but he actually does have a pretty decent deep ball. So like, there's worse things in the world than him throwing it to Hyatt.
Right. And we also have to consider that Wandale unfortunately had a significant injury, right? It a little bit different than when he was coming out of college and he had all that momentum. So it doesn't make him a bad player all of a sudden, but that transition back, he has to work back into it. It's not like he's the incumbent starter who already has this super established role. A little bit of ambiguity there. So like you said, Andy, maybe that's where Jalen Hyatt does come in, and maybe they can complement each other because they're both good players.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to get us off on a tangent on Jalen Hyatt, but just like there's a ton of players in this draft. We definitely did not say everything about all of them, but I think we covered a lot of it. So I don't really have anything else to add. It was fun to be here. I will say that.
Yeah, it was fun having you. I'm so glad to break your cherry here, and it's a lot of fun. But I know obviously I already touched on the Full Tilt Devy podcast. That's obviously where I'm from, where you're from, Andy. But do you have anything else going on that you want to talk about? And obviously let them know where they can find you.
Well, I am at A*FF on Twitter. I really should be tweeting more on there. It's kind of like I wouldn't say it's a dead season because spring football is going on in college, and I am paying attention to that. I just haven't really had time to like collect my thoughts on all that's going on right now in college football, but I am certainly paying attention, and John and I will be discussing those storylines, on Wednesdays throughout the off season. Especially as the pictures become a lot clearer. We just had a big transfer portal shakeup, so there's a lot of stuff that still needs to settle down in college football. But that's where you can find me. Yeah, I mean, we do it. It's not every week in the off season, but every other week. We're just talking a little college football. So would be very pleased to anyone that comes and listens.
Yeah, and whereas Aaron and I truly do focus on the players, and we don't get as much into schemes and offensive coordinators and all that kind of stuff. Andy has a lot more of that knowledge, and so where I will stick to the player analysis on the Full Tilt Devy podcast, Andy gets a lot more into college football, these teams, schemes, all that kind of stuff, and so you'll get a lot more of that knowledge that you won't get here. So I'm saying, don't like jump over there and forget about us, but you can listen to both.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy, for coming on. This was really fun. I'm glad we had this conversation and glad to get this out early, right? Because there's been kind of a lack of rookie analysis over the weekend here. I'm sure a lot will be dropping early next week, but this is great to get that early insight because some drafts are already starting up, as John and I mentioned with ours.
Yeah, and I have 20, or I've 19 starting tomorrow. So that podcasts later in the week aren't going to help too much at that point. So I'm going to go ahead and get this out tonight, and it'll be ready for you guys when you wake up in the morning, if you're listening to it at that point. And we really do appreciate you guys. Have fun with your rookie drafts. Like I said, reach out at any point if you have a question about a player. Why did he drop? Why is no one taking him? Like all that kind of stuff. Just slide into the DMs. Me, myself, Aaron, Andy, any of us. Just ask our opinions on the player. We have obviously paid attention to these players for quite some time now, and we can help you out. But once again, good luck in all of your drafts. We will be back as soon as possible. But until then, we are cashing out. See you guys.